My name is Amelia, and I need you to hear me clearly, because what I am about to say still shakes me when I replay it in my mind. I had just come back from the hospital, my eyes swollen from crying, my lips cracked from hours of silence. 12 hours earlier, I had watched my husband's heart stop beating. I had sat by his bed holding his cold hand until the nurses gently pulled me away. I thought walking into my house would be the hardest part. I thought silence would greet me, the kind of silence that suffocates. But when I slid my key into the lock, something else entirely awaited me. The key did not turn. I twisted again, harder this time. Metal scraping against metal. It jammed. My heart stumbled inside my chest. I pulled it out, tried the spare key hidden behind the porch stone. Nothing. It was like the lock itself had rejected me, as though the house I'd lived in for years had suddenly decided I no longer belonged. I stood on that porch, the air so cold it burned my throat, roses wilting in the back seat of my car. I pressed my forehead against the doorframe, whispering Ethan's name, hoping this was just exhaustion clouding my senses. But then my eyes caught movement through the window. The curtains were gone, my white linen curtains, the ones I hemmed myself. In their place hung heavy velvet panels, garish flowers splashed across the fabric. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor had collapsed. I leaned closer, squinting between the panels, and what I saw made my skin crawl. Boxes towered in the living room, stacked where our photographs should have been. My favorite reading chair now held a pink velvet pillow I had never seen. A floral teacup sat boldly on the coffee table. And there, settled as though she owned the space, was Diana, my mother-in-law, wrapped in a navy cardigan, sipping from the china set Ethan and I had saved 3 long years to buy. Across from her, folding my throw blankets as if she had ordered them, was Jocelyn, Ethan's younger sister. Their voices carried faintly laughter that sliced me like glass. They were moving in, not tomorrow, not next week. The day after Ethan's death, they had already claimed my home as theirs. I knocked it first, soft, then harder. My fist trembled against the wood, the sound echoing back at me. For a moment, no one answered. I thought maybe I was imagining it, that grief was twisting reality. But then the door cracked open. Diana filled the frame, arms crossed tight against her chest posture, too perfect, as if she had rehearsed this moment for years. Her lips curved into a small smile, the kind that does not warm but freezes. "Amelia," she said calmly, tilting her head as though she were welcoming a stranger. "Didn't expect you so soon." Her voice carried no sympathy, no grief for her son who had just died, only control. I forced words through my throat. "Why can't I open the door?" She leaned against the frame, eyes cold. "Because dear you don't live here anymore." The world tilted. My breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. "Excuse me?" She did not flinch. "Ethan paid for this house. My son, not you. With no children, no prenup, and no real contribution from your side, it's time this house returns to his family." Her words cut sharper than any knife. Behind her, Jocelyn appeared, holding 2 of my serving plates, her smirk like poison. "You left the side door unlocked when you rushed to the hospital. We figured you wouldn't mind." That laugh, dry, hollow, broken, escaped me, the kind that comes when shock meets cruelty. My knees wobbled, but I steadied myself, wiping away a tear I could no longer distinguish between sorrow or fury. "You're unpacking pillows and pouring tea in a house you think belongs to you?" I said slowly. Each word deliberate, but you have no idea what you've just stepped into. For the first time, I saw it, the tiny crack in Diana's smile, a flicker of uncertainty. That was all I needed. I turned on my heel, walking back toward my car keys, useless in my pocket. The January air wrapped itself around me, sharp and merciless. But deep inside, a fire stirred. They thought grief made me weak. They thought widowhood meant surrender. They had no idea what I still held in my hands. And before the story ends, they would learn the cost of underestimating me. I stood on the porch longer than I realized, the cold January wind burning my cheeks, until I finally forced myself into the car. My body trembled, not from grief this time, but from the rage, curling, like smoke, inside my chest. I had lost my husband less than a day ago, and now I was being erased by people who had never loved this house never cared for the small things Ethan and I had built. When I slammed the car door shut, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were swollen, my lips cracked, but what unsettled me most was the emptiness there. A hollow gaze that whispered, "They think you are finished. They think you will surrender." That was the moment I knew this was not just about a house. It was about my existence. Either I drew a line now, or I would be swallowed whole. I started the engine and drove aimlessly, streets blurring past. The thought of staying in that driveway, watching them sip tea in my living room, was unbearable. Eventually, I stopped at a small motel near the highway, the kind with faded neon lights and a front office that smelled faintly of bleach. The clerk did not ask questions when I slid Ethan's emergency credit card across the counter. He just handed me a key. Inside the room reeked of chemicals and loneliness. I dropped my overnight bag on the bed and sat down stiff as stone. I pressed my palms together so tightly my knuckles whitened. What kind of person changes the locks before the body is even buried? What kind of family looks at a grieving widow and sees nothing but a target? I did not cry, not yet. Instead, I stared at the cheap wallpaper until my vision blurred. Hours passed before I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over contacts I could call: my parents, an old friend, even Ethan's business partner. But every name felt wrong. I didn't want pity. I wanted control. And then it hit me. There was one place I still had power. One place I could strike back without raising my voice. The funeral. I dialed the number for St. Matthew's Memorial, my hand steady though my heart thundered. A woman answered, her voice gentle, patient. "Good morning, this is Margaret. How may I help you?" "This is Amelia Monroe," I said, and the words almost broke me. His name now only mine. "I need to update the guest list for Ethan Monroe's service." "Of course, Mrs. Monroe," she replied softly. "What changes would you like to make?" I didn't hesitate. "Remove Diana Monroe and Jocelyn Monroe." Silence stretched. Finally, she said, "Understood." I ended the call before she could ask questions. My hands were trembling now, but not from weakness. This wasn't revenge, not yet. It was the first boundary I had drawn in more than a decade of swallowing my words. And as I set the phone down for the first time since Ethan collapsed, I felt something almost like control. The motel room was still cheap, still lonely, but the air inside shifted. I lay back on the bed and stared at the cracked ceiling, my mind racing. If they wanted to push me out of my own life, then they were about to learn that I wasn't the girl who sat quietly at family dinners anymore. I was his wife. I was the woman who had built and protected this home even when he thought it was gone. And now I was done being erased. Before I close this part of my story, I want to say something to you. Yes, you listening right now. If you've ever felt silenced, if you've ever had someone try to write you out of your own life, tell me in the comments. Share your story. Because silence only serves the ones who take, and your voice is stronger than you think. That night in the motel, I whispered to myself over and over, almost like a prayer. You don't get to win this time. The words tasted foreign, but powerful. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a battle Diana never expected me to fight. The next move would be mine. The motel walls closed in on me that night, heavy with the weight of bleach and silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Diana had said on that porch. She had spoken like a judge, handing down a sentence as if I were an intruder, rather than the woman who had built a life inside those walls. But what Diana never knew, what Ethan himself never fully realized, was the truth about how that house still stood. 2 years earlier, almost to the day, I had sat on that same porch with Ethan. His shoulders slumped, his hands raking through his hair in frustration. It was January then, too darker and colder than this one. His startup had collapsed the week before. The bank froze his accounts. His credit score plummeted like a stone. And when he finally spoke, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. "They might take the house, Amelia." I remember my stomach tightening, the cold air slicing through me. He wasn't a weak man, but in that moment he was broken, ashamed to even look at me. I touched his hand, but he pulled away, retreating inside himself. That was the night I understood something: he needed me not just as a wife, but as a shield. The next morning, I made a decision I never told him. I drove to the credit union, sat in a sterile office that smelled of paper and ink, and quietly began the refinance process. I moved the mortgage into my name using the small nest egg I had been saving since leaving my interior design job a decade earlier. No one knew. Not Ethan, not my parents, and certainly not Diana. For weeks I juggled paperwork meetings and side jobs to make sure payments were covered. Ethan thought the mortgage confirmations were still tied to his account, but I had redirected everything. I patched leaky faucets, budgeted groceries, and painted over peeling walls. I carried our home on my shoulders, never once asking for recognition, because to Diana that would have been proof that her son had failed as a man. I watched Ethan heal slowly, piecing himself back together. He never realized what I had done in the background, and I never told him. I didn't need the credit. I needed the house. I needed him to believe we were still standing, because sometimes belief is the only thing that keeps people alive. So when Diana looked me in the eye and said, "My son paid for this house, not you," I nearly laughed in her face. She had no idea. She had never scrubbed those walls, never stayed up past midnight comparing bills, never eaten ramen for weeks just to cover the payments. To her, I was just the woman who played house. To me, I was the one who saved it. That truth sat like an ember in my chest, small but glowing. And I knew it would ignite when the time came. I shifted on the motel bed, pulling the thin blanket tighter around me. My phone buzzed with a notification, some meaningless alert. I ignored it. Instead, I thought about the years I had spent in silence, letting Diana dominate family gatherings, letting her voice ring louder than mine. I had swallowed her comments about Savannah being too soft and her sneers at my floral wallpaper. But that silence had cost me too much. Not anymore. If you're listening right now, I want you to think about this. Have you ever carried a burden in silence just to protect someone else? Did you ever hide your effort because you knew no one would give you credit anyway? Tell me in the comments. Because maybe you'll realize, like I did, that silence can keep you alive, but it can also erase you. That night I whispered to myself, what I had never dared to say aloud, I saved this house. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough to keep the truth alive. And deep down, I knew that truth was my weapon. Diana thought she had locked me out, but she had only locked herself into a battle she couldn't win. And soon she would find out just how much I had left to fight with. The next morning, the motel curtains glowed faintly with pale winter light. I hadn't really slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, staring at the worn carpet, thinking about Ethan's last voicemail, the one he left me just before his heart gave out. His voice, warm and tired, still echoed inside my head. And now, as I clutched my phone, I knew I had to do something I had never dared to do before. Draw a boundary. I dialed the number for St. Matthew's Memorial again. My hand didn't shake this time. The same woman answered, her voice soft. "This is Amelia Monroe," I said firmly. "I need to make an update to the guest list." "Yes, Mrs. Monroe," she replied. "What changes would you like to make?" I breathed deeply. "Please remove Diana Monroe and Jocelyn Monroe from the list." The silence on the other end lasted longer than the first time. Finally, she said, "Understood." I ended the call quickly, but this time I didn't collapse into grief. I stood straighter. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the surge of something unfamiliar control. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It wasn't even anger. It was the quiet power of finally saying no after years of swallowing yes. I put the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the blank motel wall. For over a decade, I had lived under Diana's shadow. At family dinners, she had spoken over me, belittled me, made Ethan believe I was too fragile, too soft. I had smiled, nodded, let the barbs pass. But now Ethan was gone, and Diana thought I was an easy target. She thought widowhood had stripped me of strength. She had no idea she had just awakened a part of me I didn't even know existed. That day, I ate breakfast from the vending machine, a granola bar, and a stale cup of coffee. I sat by the window and watched the world move on outside. Cars passed, people laughed on the sidewalk, and I wondered how life could be so normal when mine had collapsed overnight. But then I reminded myself, my life wasn't finished. They wanted me erased. I refused. I called Angela, my old college roommate turned real estate attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, but I left her a voicemail. Angela, it's Amelia. I need help. It's about the house. My voice cracked, but it didn't matter. I had taken the first step. The rest of the day I stayed in that motel room, pacing, planning. I wrote notes on the back of motel receipts, sketching possible moves like a general preparing for war. Every so often the grief would hit me again, the weight of Ethan's absence, the raw silence of a life ripped apart. But each time it came, I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered, "You don't get to win, Diana." That night I turned off the light and lay in bed. The heater rattled, the air smelled faintly of mold, but for once I wasn't suffocating. I whispered into the darkness, "This is my line. You don't cross it again." And before I drifted into a restless half-sleep, I made myself a promise. Tomorrow I would not just grieve, I would begin to fight. But before I close this chapter, I want to ask you something. If you've ever had to cut someone out of your life just to breathe again, share it with me. Have you ever drawn a line you knew would change everything? Because sometimes survival isn't about revenge, it's about finally saying enough. And as I fell asleep to the hum of the motel heater, I realized that was exactly what I had done. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. By Tuesday afternoon, the January air had sharpened into a blade. I drove slowly past my street, circling the block, until I found a place to park, behind a row of hedges. My heart pounded as I stared at the back of the house I had refinanced, repaired, and protected in silence. Diana's car wasn't in the driveway. Joseline's bright blue sedan was nowhere in sight either. The coast was clear. The side door had always been a weakness. Ethan promised for months that he would fix the faulty latch, but he never did. Now that flaw became my opening. I slipped from the car, pulled my coat tight, and approached the laundry room entrance. One twist of my wrist, and the latch gave way with a quiet click. Inside, the air smelled foreign. Lavender air fresheners, the kind Diana adored and I despised, clung to the walls. My framed photos were gone, replaced by cheap landscape prints. The hallway looked stripped of us, as though they were trying to rewrite the story of who had lived here. My chest ached, but I didn't let myself dwell. This wasn't a visit of mourning, it was reconnaissance. I moved quickly, keeping my footsteps light. The living room had been rearranged, my throw pillows replaced Ethan's blanket, missing from the couch. My hand grazed the wall, where our wedding photo had hung now just a blank space. I swallowed hard. Focus. I made my way toward Ethan's office, tucked in the back between the guest room and the laundry. Diana had always hated that space. She called it his digital junkyard, a room cluttered with wires, receipts, and USB drives. That's why I knew it would be safe. She wouldn't touch it. The moment I stepped inside, I felt him. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly on the air, the stacks of papers still arranged in his chaotic order. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. Then I went to work. I rifled through drawers, pulling out old receipts, half-sorted stacks of business cards, flash drives labeled in Ethan's careful handwriting. My fingers shook, unsure of what exactly I was searching for, proof maybe, or a memory strong enough to anchor me to him. Then I saw it. A slim black folder wedged between two instruction manuals. Across the top, in his unmistakable hand, postnup. Do not discard. My breath caught. Ethan and I had never signed a prenup. We had married in our 30s, broke, but in love, dismissing paperwork as something that killed romance. But a postnup, I opened the folder slowly, my hands trembling. 3 pages on legal letterhead stared back at me. My eyes scanned desperately for names, signatures, terms. And there it was, a clause highlighted in yellow. In the event of the husband's passing, all jointly owned assets, including real estate, are to be transferred wholly to Amelia Monroe, unless otherwise specified in a last will and testament. I froze. Tears blurred my vision as I flipped to the last page. Ethan's signature was there, my signature too. Witnesses. A notary seal. It was binding. At the back of the folder lay a folded sheet of notebook paper. Ethan's handwriting leapt off the page, slanted casual darker ink than usual. 4 lines. If you're reading this, it means something awful has happened. If Mom tries anything, show this to your lawyer. You know how she is. Keep this safe, Amelia. My knees buckled. I sat down hard in his chair, clutching the letter. My chest ached with grief, vindication, and gratitude all at once. He knew. On some level, Ethan had known Diana would come for me. Despite his flaws, he had tried to protect me the only way he could. I tucked the folder inside my coat, heart pounding. This wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon, and Diana had no idea it existed. Before I end this part, I need to tell you something. If you've ever stumbled across proof that changes everything, the kind of truth that flips the entire story, share it in the comments. Because sometimes one piece of paper can be the difference between being erased and being remembered. As I slipped back out through the side door folder pressed tight against me, the cold air filled my lungs. For the first time since Ethan's death, I felt a spark of strength. The battle wasn't over, but now I had ammunition. And by the time Diana discovered what I held, it would already be too late for her. The folder pressed against my chest like a secret heartbeat as I hurried back to the motel. I locked the flimsy door behind me, leaned against it, and finally let out the breath I had been holding since stepping into Ethan's office. My hands shook as I laid the black folder on the bed. For a moment I just stared at it, afraid that if I opened it again, the words would vanish like smoke. But they didn't. The signatures were still there, etched into the paper with permanence. The highlighted clause burned into my vision. All jointly owned assets, including real estate, were to be transferred wholly to me. It was real, legally binding, untouchable. I unfolded Ethan's handwritten note once more. His letters curved just the way I remembered. He always signed his name with a quick flourish, just a single E at the end, like a boy passing me a note in class. Now his message read like a lifeline. If Mom tries anything, show this to your lawyer. You know how she is. My throat tightened. He had known. Somewhere inside him, beneath the stress, beneath the illness, he had predicted this exact battle. And even after everything he had left me, the one weapon that could keep me standing. I spent the night sitting cross-legged on the stiff motel bed, reading the post-nup until the words blurred into the patterned comforter. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was preparing. My tears had dried into something harder, sharper. For years I had kept the peace, letting Diana throw her barbs, letting her shadow cover me. But not now. At sunrise, I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't dialed in years. Angela Flores, my old college roommate turned real estate attorney. She had always been sharp-driven, the kind of person who walked into a room and owned it without raising her voice. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. Her voicemail picked up, and for a moment I faltered. But then I remembered Ethan's note, and my voice steadied. Angela, it's Amelia. I need help. It's about the house. It's urgent. Hours later, she returned my call. Her voice carried warmth I hadn't expected after all this time. We're going to make this right, she said simply, as if there was no doubt in her mind. That was the first time in days I felt the floor under my feet. By the afternoon, I was back at the motel kitchenette, forcing down instant soup when the knock came. Sharp. 3 quick raps against the thin door. I froze. My hand tightened around the spoon. Slowly, I pulled the curtain aside just enough to see Diana. She stood there in black like a widow from a stage play. Beside her was a man in a gray suit with a clipboard tucked under his arm. His wedding band glinted as he shifted, uncomfortable already. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stepped outside, folder in hand. Coat zipped high against the wind. We met in the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my boots. Diana smiled thinly. Amelia, this is Mr. Langley, our family attorney. We're here to discuss next steps regarding the house. Next steps, I repeated flatly. Mr. Langley cleared his throat. Since Ethan left no will, his estate is subject to division among next of kin. As his mother and sister, they have legal rights. I almost laughed. Instead, I pulled the folder from under my coat and held it steady. You're both in luck, I said evenly, because this will save us all some time. This is a notarized post-nuptial agreement signed 3 years ago. 2 witnesses, legal letterhead. It transfers all shared assets to me in the event of Ethan's death. Silence dropped heavy. Mr. Langley reached out instinctively. May I see? No, I cut him off. You'll get a copy through official channels. I've already retained counsel. Diana's smile cracked her eyes, narrowing into slits. You're bluffing, she hissed. Am I asked, tilting my head. If I am, you should feel confident enough to walk away and celebrate. But if I'm not, then you've trespassed, tampered with property, and broken the law. Mr. Langley shifted, stepping slightly away from her. For the first time I saw it, the fracture in her certainty. Her voice dropped venomous. You were never part of our family. You stole my son. My grip on the folder tightened. He wasn't a trophy. He was a man. And I didn't steal him. You pushed him away the second he stopped living by your script. I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. Through the window, I watched them retreat, Diana stiff with rage, Langley awkward and silent. That night I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with Ethan's letter in my lap, whispering to myself, the next move is mine. By Friday morning, the motel room had begun to feel less like shelter and more like a cage. Damp coffee grounds lingered in the air. The carpet held the faint smell of mildew no matter how many windows I cracked. I tried to distract myself with funeral arrangements, music flowers, the eulogy. But every time I touched a piece of paper, I remembered Diana's face in that parking lot. She was not retreating. She was reloading. The proof arrived sooner than I expected. Sometime during the night, someone slid an envelope under my door. No stamp, no return address, just crisp white paper folded into anonymity. I stared at it for a long moment before finally picking it up. Inside was an official document bearing the seal of the county probate court. At the top in bold letters, respondent Amelia Monroe. I read slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The petitioner, Mrs. Diana Monroe, alleges that undue influence, mental distress, and coercion may have impacted the decisions of Mr. Ethan Monroe in the months preceding his death. My vision blurred. The words stung like acid. She was accusing me of manipulating Ethan, of forcing him to sign the postnup, of exploiting the man I had loved, the man I had carried when his business collapsed. She wanted not only the house, but my very identity as his wife burned to ash. The rage that filled me was not explosive. It was steady like fire low in a furnace. I picked up my phone and dialed Angela. I figured you'd call, she said calmly. She's saying I coerced him, I whispered. Angela's voice didn't waver. That's what people do when they don't have legal footing. They throw mud and hope some of it sticks. She wants everything, I said flatly, not just the house. She wants to rewrite who he was, who we were. No, Angela corrected gently. She wants control. It has never been about money, Amelia. I closed my eyes. She was right. Diana wasn't mourning. She was strategizing. I want to fight her, I said finally. Not just stop her, I want to destroy her. Angela paused. Then her voice shifted steel beneath velvet. Good. But we do it smart. You don't speak to her. You don't respond to her letters. You let me build this like a wall, one brick at a time. When the call ended, I sat on the bed, the court letter trembling in my hand. My anger was sharp, but my resolve sharper. She wanted to accuse me of coercion. Let her. I had truth on my side, and now I had Angela too. But before I go further, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been falsely accused by someone desperate to take you down? Did you stay silent or did you fight? Tell me in the comments, because your voice matters more than their lies. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new message. The name on the screen froze me, James Harding, Ethan's former business partner. We hadn't spoken in over a year. His text read, Hey Amelia, I don't want to get involved, but Diana reached out. She asked about Ethan's mental state during the last few months. Wanted to know if I had emails or anything about confusion or forgetfulness. She mentioned that one investor meeting, remember he came back pretty out of it. Just wanted to give you a heads up. My stomach clenched. I remembered. 3 months before Ethan died, he had returned from a client meeting pale and shaken. He said he had forgotten where he parked, even the name of the man he had just met. He brushed it off as stress, insomnia, too much caffeine. But now I understood Diana had heard about it. She was building her case piece by piece, painting him as unfit. That night, I sat in the dark court papers spread across the motel table, James's message glowing on my phone. I whispered Ethan's name not in grief this time, but in a vow. If Diana wanted war, she had chosen the wrong opponent. The message from James gnawed at me long after midnight. I sat at the motel's fold-out table, the court petition open beside me, my phone buzzing silently on the blanket. Diana was building her narrative with whispers, turning a moment of Ethan's exhaustion into evidence of a failing mind. If she succeeded, the post-nup could be shredded, my protection gone. But then a memory surfaced. One evening, months before Ethan collapsed, he had mentioned an appointment at St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. Just to rule things out, he said, brushing it off while we cleared dinner plates. Probably nothing. I hadn't gone with him because he insisted I shouldn't worry. Now that memory burned in my brain like a lifeline. I tore through my suitcase, scattering receipts and mortgage statements across the motel bed. My hands shook as I dug through unopened envelopes, utility bills, and old birthday cards. Finally buried under a stack of mail I had shoved aside, I found it, a sealed envelope from St. Michael's. I ripped it open with trembling fingers. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into clarity. Following your recent cognitive assessment, we are pleased to inform you that your results fall within the normal range. No signs of early cognitive decline were detected. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Relief flooded me so fiercely that I laughed out loud, a sound that startled even me. Ethan had been fine. Whatever moment of forgetfulness James recalled was nothing more than stress. And now I held proof in my hands. The next morning I met Angela on the courthouse steps. She wore her hair in a tight bun, a folder tucked firmly under her arm. When she saw me, her eyes softened, but her voice was crisp. Ready? I nodded, the neurologist's letter secure in my bag. For the first time in days, I felt steady. Inside the courtroom was sterile, the echo of shoes and whispered conversations bouncing off marble floors. Diana sat in the front row, dressed in dramatic black lace, a tissue clutched like a stage prop. Jocelyn sat beside her head, bowed in practiced grief. Their attorney, Mr. Langley, shuffled papers nervously. The judge, a woman with silver hair and glasses perched low on her nose, called the session to order. Mr. Langley went first, spinning Diana as the concerned mother. He spoke of Ethan's stress, his sudden death, the mysterious timing of the post-nup. He never said the word coercion, but he let it linger in the air like smoke. Diana dabbed at her eyes, right on cue. Then Angela stood. She didn't raise her voice or wave her arms. She simply laid down the facts, each one like a brick set firmly into place. The notarized post-nup, the deed already transferred into my name, the mortgage payments made exclusively from my account for 2 years. And finally, with deliberate calm, she handed the neurologist's letter to the judge. This document, Angela said, is dated 3 months before Mr. Monroe's death. It confirms his full mental capacity. The courtroom fell silent. The judge read quietly, then looked up. "Do you have any medical evidence to contradict this?" she asked Langley. He faltered. "No, Your Honor." "Then I see no grounds," she said, already writing. "The post-nuptial agreement is binding. The deed is in Mrs. Monroe's name. This house legally belongs to her. Case dismissed." The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. My hands trembled under the table, but I didn't break. I didn't smile. I only exhaled a long, slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for days. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a clear, impossible blue. Birds chirped in the oak trees as if nothing monumental had just happened. But inside me something shifted. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the rightful owner of my life again. Before I leave this chapter, let me ask you, have you ever stood in front of someone determined to erase you only to win back everything with one undeniable truth? If you have, share it with me, because victory isn't always loud. It can be as quiet as a judge's gavel, and the sound of your own breath finally set free. I walked down the courthouse steps, folder in hand, ready for whatever Diana tried next. She thought she could break me with lies. Instead, she had built the stage for my triumph. And this was only the beginning. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a weight I could feel in my bones. I clutched Ethan's folder under my arm, my pulse still racing from the verdict. For the first time since he died, I had stood my ground and won. Yet even as sunlight spilled across the marble steps, I knew it wasn't over. Diana was waiting. She appeared almost instantly, heels clicking against stone, her face pale, but her eyes burning. She stepped close, her voice cutting like glass. "You may have won the house," she hissed, "but you will never erase me. I am his mother." I turned slowly, my own voice steady. "You already erased yourself, Diana. The moment you broke into our home. The moment you lied under oath. Ethan knew who you were. That's why he signed the postnup. That's why he wrote the letter." Her mask cracked. Just a fraction, but enough. I leaned closer. "And if you come near me again, I won't need a courtroom to protect myself. I have already filed the restraining order." Her jaw tightened, rage spilling from every line of her face. "You can't keep me from his funeral," she spat. I didn't blink. I already did. "I called the funeral home the morning after you changed the locks. Your name is off the list. If you show up, they'll escort you out." For a moment, silence hung between us, sharp as broken glass. Then she spun on her heel, storming down the steps. Mr. Langley trailed awkwardly behind, fumbling with his briefcase. I watched them retreat like a queen stripped of her crown, her power crumbling under the weight of truth. But I knew her too well. Diana wasn't finished. She would keep trying to claw her way back into a life she had already poisoned. And I had to be ready for the next strike. That night I sat at the motel table with Ethan's letter in my hand. My fingers traced the ink, the curve of his writing. I wondered if he had ever imagined how quickly she would come for me. Maybe he had. Maybe that's why he left me this weapon. I didn't sleep much. My body twitched with adrenaline, my mind spinning through possibilities. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. And now I need you to pause with me for a moment. Have you ever faced someone who refused to let go? Someone who clung to control even when it was destroying everything? How did you handle it? Share it below because your story might remind someone else that they're not alone. When morning came, I felt ready. Not healed, not whole, but ready. The motel walls no longer felt like a cage. They felt like a war room. I spread papers across the bed mortgage records, the postnup, the neurologist's letter. I highlighted sections, circled dates, and rehearsed arguments in my head. For years, Diana had been the voice in every room, drowning me out. But now the evidence was louder than her lies. Ethan's handwriting whispered from the folded note, "Keep this safe, Amelia." I whispered back, "I will, and I'll keep myself safe too." As I tucked the papers neatly into their folder, I realized something powerful. Winning in court wasn't the end game, it was the opening move. Diana's rage had only sharpened the line between us. And the next time she crossed it, I wouldn't just defend myself. I would make sure there was nothing left for her to grasp. For now, though, I allowed myself one long, steady breath, a moment of quiet victory, a taste of peace. It would not last, but it was enough to keep me standing until the next storm, and the storm I knew was already gathering. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky heavy enough to press on my chest. It had been 5 days since Diana filed her petition, 72 hours since the judge dismissed it, and less than 2 since she hissed that I could never erase her. I woke in the motel with my jaw clenched, my body still braced for impact. When the envelope slid under my door, I already knew it was from her. No stamp, no handwriting, just another attempt to rattle me. Inside was a neatly typed document from Chatham County Probate Court. Diana was formally challenging the postnup. Her claim this time was sharper. She alleged that Ethan had been under undue influence and mental distress when he signed. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was anger, slow and hot like iron warming over flame. She wasn't just after the house anymore. She wanted to paint me as a manipulator, a fraud, the villain in her story. I called Angela immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "She's saying I coerced him," I said flatly. I expected that Angela replied, her tone even almost calm. "That's what people do when they have no real case. They sling mud. They hope it sticks." "She wants more than the house," I whispered. "She wants to rewrite who he was, who we were." Angela's voice softened for a moment. "No, Amelia, she wants control. That's all this has ever been about." I closed my eyes, the motel air thick around me. I don't just want to stop her anymore. I want to fight. I want to end this. Angela paused. When she spoke again, her words carried steel. "Good. But we'll do it smart. No contact. No response. Every brick in the wall will be evidence, not emotion. I hung up staring at the ceiling court documents spread across the bed. My rage wasn't loud, but it was steady, the kind that builds foundations rather than cracks them. She could accuse me of coercion. She could whisper her lies to every lawyer in town. But I had truth, and now I had a wall forming around me. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen sent a chill down my spine. James Harding, Ethan's old business partner. I hadn't seen his number in over a year. His message was short. "Hey, Amelia." Diana reached out. She asked about Ethan's mental state. Wanted to know if I had anything, emails, medical records, anything showing confusion. She mentioned that investor meeting, you remember. He came back shaken, forgot where he parked. I thought you should know. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. Yes, I remembered. 3 months before Ethan died, he came home pale and unsettled. He said he had forgotten the man's name. He brushed it off as stress. But now Diana had found that crack and was prying it open with a crowbar. For hours I sat at the motel table, the letter from the court on one side, James's text on the other. My thoughts churned. If she could convince the court that Ethan wasn't of sound mind, even circumstantial whispers might unravel everything. And then I remembered. The neurology appointment. The sealed envelope from St. Michael's still tucked among my documents. Proof that Ethan's mind was clear, his decisions valid. She was building her case out of rumors. I had the truth on paper. I leaned back in the creaky motel chair and laughed, not with joy, but with grim satisfaction. She thought she was clever, gathering fragments and gossip. She had no idea the one document that could shatter her entire argument was already in my hands. But let me pause here because I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone twist a half-truth into a weapon against you? Did you fight it, or did you let silence win? Share it below. Sometimes the only way to break their grip is to shine light directly onto their lies. That night I spread everything across the bed. The postnup, the neurologist's letter, the mortgage receipts, my war chest, my weapons. My voice had been ignored at family dinners, silenced in living rooms, drowned out by Diana's sharp tongue. But in this battle, evidence would speak louder than her venom. As the motel heater hummed and the night deepened, I whispered Ethan's name. Not a plea, not a cry, a vow. I'll finish this for both of us. The storm wasn't over. It was only tightening around me. But now I had lightning in my hands. The courthouse victory should have been enough, but I knew Diana too well. She had lost the legal battle, yet her hunger for control was bottomless. I felt it in the way she looked at me on the courthouse steps, venom tucked behind every word. That gaze promised another strike, and I wasn't wrong. The first attempt came quietly. An envelope slid under my motel door, 6 words typed in block font. This house will always be mine. I read it once, then laughed softly, not with humor, but with release. It was desperation printed on paper. She had no claim left, no documents, no case. Just hollow threats. Still, it reminded me she wasn't finished haunting me. Days later, I saw her again. It was early, barely 7 in the morning. I stood in the kitchen of the house I had finally reclaimed, Ethan's old sweatshirt draped around me, coffee cooling in my hand. When I glanced out the front window, my stomach knotted. There she was, parked across the street engine, off cigarette smoke curling from the half-cracked window. She didn't knock. She didn't approach. She just sat there staring straight ahead, her figure stiff in the driver's seat, watching, waiting. I didn't call Angela. I didn't take a photo for evidence. Instead, I set my mug down, slipped on my slippers, and walked barefoot out to the porch. The air bit at my skin, but I didn't flinch. I stood there in silence, hair undone, face bare, meeting her gaze across the street. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she flicked her cigarette out the window, started the engine, and drove away without a word. It wasn't surrender, it was retreat. A reminder that she still existed, still lingered like a shadow waiting to pounce. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, not anymore, but from the weight of vigilance. My body remained braced, as if impact could strike at any second. 3 days passed without her return. In those days, I cleaned every drawer Ethan had touched, organized files, sorted through old receipts. Each piece of paper carried a memory, each memory cut like glass. And yet with every drawer I closed, I felt stronger. The silence of the house no longer pressed against me, it yielded little by little to my presence. But even as I rebuilt, Diana's words echoed in my head. You were never part of our family. You stole my son. That was her truth. Mine was different. Ethan wasn't stolen, he was loved. He wasn't coerced, he was trusted. And when his life ended, it was my name on the documents, my hands on the mortgage, my heart keeping the home alive. I held on to that truth like armor. And before I move forward, let me ask you, have you ever had someone linger like a shadow, refusing to release their grip even when they've already lost? How did you respond? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful act is not confrontation, it's standing tall in silence until they back away. The morning after I last saw her car, I found Ethan's gardening notebook tucked into the back of a drawer. His handwriting filled the pages with sketches of marigolds, rosemary, lavender. He had written one note at the bottom of a page, for Amelia one day when you're ready. I wasn't ready, but I went outside anyway, knelt in the soil, and began to plant. Each seed felt like defiance, a declaration that this ground was mine. As I pressed the dirt over the marigold seeds, I whispered the words Diana had thrown at me. This house will always be mine. Then, I buried her letter deep under the soil, letting it become fertilizer for something brighter. When the sun set that evening, I stood barefoot in the yard, dirt clinging to my hands, the notebook open beside me. The garden was only soil for now, but I saw what Ethan had seen, color waiting to rise. And for the first time since his death, I felt peace blooming in the cracks Diana had tried to shatter. The chapel smelled of lilies and cedar polish. It was Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Ethan's heart gave out. The service was scheduled for noon, but by 11:15, the pews were already filling with neighbors, colleagues, and old friends. Some had driven from Atlanta, others from Charleston, each carrying their own memories of him. I walked slowly down the aisle, my black dress heavy with grief, but my spine straight. People whispered condolences as I passed, but their words blurred. What stayed sharp was the sight of the urn at the altar wrapped in blue velvet, Ethan's favorite color. I had chosen it myself. Angela sat near the front, no longer my attorney for the day, but my friend. She gave me a quiet nod, no words needed. Music hummed faintly in the background, the minister flipping through his notes. For a moment, I let myself breathe. And then I saw them. 2 silhouettes slipped into the back pew, dressed in black veils pinned neatly, Diana and Jocelyn. They had not been on the guest list. I had made sure of it. The funeral home had promised me they would be turned away. But somehow, they had slipped past wearing mourning-like costumes. My blood turned cold. My heart didn't race with grief, this time it pounded with fury. I had buried Ethan once already. I would not let them turn his funeral into theater. I rose from my seat, the wooden pew creaking beneath me. Every head turned as I walked down the aisle, heels echoing against the stone floor. Even the minister stepped aside, sensing something sacred unfolding. When I reached the back, Diana's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Jocelyn's eyes darted down, unable to meet mine. "You're not supposed to be here," I said quietly, but my voice carried through the silence. Diana's chin lifted. "We're not leaving," she replied. "I gave birth to him." My hands trembled, but not from weakness. "Then you should have respected his wishes. I am his wife, the only one he chose. You lost that privilege when you broke into our home and lied in court." Her nostrils flared. "You can't stop me from mourning my own son." "Not mourning," I said firmly, "performing." The room held its breath. "If you stay, I will walk out this moment," I continued, my voice low, but unwavering. "I'll take the minister with me. We will finish this service in a park, a parking lot, even a kitchen table if we must. But you will not sit here and pretend you didn't try to erase him." Silence stretched like glass about to shatter. Then Jocelyn spoke, her voice fragile. "Mom," she whispered without looking up, "let's go." Diana's head whipped toward her, stunned, but Jocelyn stood smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "We're not wanted here. Let's stop pretending." Slowly, with reluctance thick in every step, Diana rose. Together they walked down the aisle, heels clicking against stone, and left without another word. The door shut softly behind them. The entire room exhaled at once. I turned back toward the altar. The minister nodded, the musicians resumed, and I returned to the front. My hand steadied on the velvet urn as I whispered goodbye, not surrounded by liars, not tainted by venom, but wrapped in the love of those who truly knew him. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Before we move forward, let me tell you this. Sometimes the bravest act isn't shouting or fighting, it's standing firm in silence until truth clears the room. Have you ever had to face down someone at their most shameless? Tell me in the comments. Because strength often looks like calm when everyone expects chaos. That day I walked out of the chapel with my head high. Diana thought she could turn his funeral into a stage. Instead, she had been escorted out by her own daughter. But I knew the story wasn't finished. A woman like Diana never leaves quietly. And the next time she appeared, it wouldn't be at a funeral. After the funeral, the house was silent in a way that watched you waiting for you to falter. I stood at the kitchen sink, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug Ethan had left on the counter. The coffee had gone cold long ago, but I didn't care. The garden outside was bare-turned soil, marking the beginnings of something that would grow slowly, patiently. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air of early spring fill my lungs. Diana's car never returned that morning nor the next day. The absence of her presence was a strange comfort, though I knew it was temporary. She had retreated, but she had not surrendered. Still, in those quiet moments, I finally felt the house was mine again. Not just the legal claim, not just the postnup or mortgage records, but the warmth, the history, the small sacred moments Ethan and I had built together. I began the tedious process of reclaiming the space. Drawers were emptied and organized, old receipts filed, bills sorted. Each item I touched carried a memory of Ethan, of a life lived in tandem. I cleaned surfaces, dusted shelves, restored order where chaos had been imposed. Every step, every motion felt like a reclamation ritual, a silent declaration. This space belongs to me, to us, to the life we shared. In the midst of the cleanup, I stumbled upon Ethan's old gardening notebook. It was tucked away in the back of a drawer, forgotten during the chaos of the funeral and court. Flipping it open, I saw his careful sketches of marigolds, rosemary, and lavender, each page meticulously labeled, each line of planning a note to the future. At the bottom of one page, a small handwritten note read, "For Amelia, one day when you're ready." I wasn't ready that day. Not fully, but I could not ignore it. I stepped outside into the fresh soil, the chill of the early morning biting at my hands. Kneeling in the dirt, I planted each seed according to his plans, pressing them firmly into the soil. I watered them slowly, deliberately, imagining the blooms that would emerge vibrant against the muted winter backdrop. With each seed pressed into the earth, I felt a piece of the weight lift off my shoulders, replaced by a quiet power I hadn't known I possessed. The envelope from Diana lay in my hand, 6 stark words printed boldly. "This house will always be mine." I buried it deep beneath the marigold bed, letting the soil fertilizer and growth transform her empty threats into something productive, something beautiful. It was symbolic, yes, but also practical. Her words could no longer touch me. I lingered there as the sun dipped lower warmth brushing my face. For the first time since Ethan died, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. Not because the threat had vanished completely, but because I had taken action, established boundaries, and reclaimed what was mine. In those days following the funeral, I also began to restore my interior design business. Small at first, one client at a time. A widow repainting her kitchen to claim her own space, a retired couple building a sunroom to grow orchids, a young woman leaving her fiancé, wanting the apartment to feel like hers again. Each project was a piece of therapy, a way to plant order and beauty into spaces that had been neglected or misused, much like I had done with my own life. Through it all, I realized something essential: strength isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. Strength can be measured in small victories, quiet persistence, and the unwavering decision to occupy your own space fully unapologetically. I paused for a moment, cup of tea in hand, the smell of cinnamon curling in the air as Ethan always liked. I looked at the garden. Shoots had begun to emerge, tentative but stubborn. Life, even after tragedy, finds a way. And in that quiet rebellion, in that deliberate reclamation of my home and my life, I felt something else: freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from those who tried to erase me. And freedom to honor Ethan in my own way, without compromise, without intrusion, without apology. Before I end this chapter, I want to leave you with this. Sometimes the most profound victories are quiet, lived in the spaces you reclaim for yourself. Have you ever taken back something that was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments. Because victory is not always public. Sometimes it blooms silently, just like marigolds in spring. The days after the funeral were quiet, but not empty. Each morning I walked through the house, touching surfaces, opening drawers, and rearranging small details. The photos Diana had replaced were gone. In their place, I hung pictures of Ethan and me by the lake, our dog Max, before he passed sunsets we had chased, and the life we had built together. The house was no longer hers, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like mine. But the process of reclaiming space wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Each object I touched, each drawer I organized, reminded me of who I had been and who I had become. The grief that had weighed on me like a heavy blanket slowly folded into routine. It appeared in the way I brewed my morning tea, in the quiet between songs on the radio, in the moments I paused to remember Ethan's laugh, or the way he would run his hands through his hair when stressed. I continued to work in the garden, tending to the marigold bed where I had buried Diana's letter. The soil was dark and rich, and small shoots had begun to push through, defiant and stubborn. I watered them gently each morning, feeling a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with life itself. The garden was a space of renewal, a testament to resilience, a reminder that growth could occur even after pain. Inside the house, I restored Ethan's office, leaving one drawer untouched. It was not a shrine, it was a promise. A promise that our life together, our love, and our shared memories would always have a space preserved and untouchable by those who had tried to erase them. I also reopened my interior design business, starting slowly with one client at a time. Each project was a chance to pour care, vision, and quiet power into spaces that needed rebuilding. A widow repainting her kitchen to reclaim her independence. A retired couple creating a sunroom to grow orchids. A young woman reshaping her apartment after leaving her fiancé, determined to make it hers. In every space, I saw fragments of myself, and in turning chaos into beauty, I healed parts of my own life. One Saturday morning, while trimming rosemary in the kitchen window, I found a simple envelope delivered by regular mail. No signature, no return address. Inside was a check with a note. "You handled everything with grace." My heart clenched. The handwriting was familiar. It was Jocelyn's. She had acknowledged me quietly, without fanfare, without trying to reclaim what had been lost. I slipped the note into Ethan's garden journal, a small gesture of closure that neither changed the past nor erased the struggle, but reminded me that even fractured relationships could contain moments of recognition. The garden outside began to flourish. Marigolds burst into shades of gold and orange, almost as if flames had been planted in the soil. The sun warmed my skin as I sat barefoot, dirt under my nails, savoring the sight of growth from what had once been a battlefield. I whispered to the blooms what I had whispered to Diana's letter buried beneath them. "You have nothing left." In these moments, I realized that the sweetest revenge was not courtroom victories, not proving them wrong, but reclaiming my life, my home, my identity, and my peace. I had survived the legal battles, the intrusion, the lies, and I was standing firmly in the life that belonged to me. I brewed a cup of cinnamon tea, the aroma filling the kitchen, and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in months: serenity. I was no longer waiting for the next move. I was no longer defined by the actions of those who tried to erase me. This house was mine. This life was mine. My voice, my decisions, my peace, finally mine, and I would not hand them over again. And in that quiet, I found freedom. The house had changed with the season. Spring arrived fully, and with it a sense of life I had almost forgotten. The marigolds in the garden were in full bloom, their gold and orange petals reaching for the sun, stubborn and resilient. I walked barefoot among them, dirt clinging to my skin, each step grounding me, each breath reminding me that I was still here, still alive, still in control. Diana never returned. I didn't receive letters, phone calls, or threats. Whether it was the restraining order, the court victories, or simply the quiet strength I had begun to radiate, she had retreated. And that retreat spoke louder than any legal ruling or confrontation could have. She was no longer present in my life. A shadow in the rearview mirror, a memory I could acknowledge without fear. I spent mornings in the garden tending to rosemary, lavender, and marigolds, and evenings inside setting up the house in a way that felt right for me. The guest room was painted a soft sage green. The photos she had replaced with landscapes were gone, and in their place were images of my life with Ethan. Sunrises over the lake, moments with our dog, Max snapshots of dinners shared, and adventures that were ours alone. One drawer in Ethan's office remained untouched, a small shrine, not for mourning, but for remembering. My interior design business flourished slowly, deliberately, one client at a time. Each project was an extension of the life I was reclaiming for myself. I helped widows find their own space, couples transform neglected rooms, and young women reclaim apartments that no longer felt like theirs. With each brush stroke and arrangement, I restored a part of my own sense of purpose. My grief became a tool for empathy, and my care became a form of quiet power. I never expected closure to come from anyone else. But one day, a small envelope arrived at the house by regular mail. Inside a note and a check from Jocelyn. "You handled everything with grace," it read. No signature, no fanfare, just acknowledgement. I slipped it into Ethan's garden journal. It didn't undo the past or erase the pain, but it was a reminder that even fractured relationships could recognize strength when it stood firm. By midsummer, the garden was thriving. The marigold's gold and orange petals almost glowed in the sunlight, standing proud over the soil that had once buried Diana's letter. I had planted more than flowers, I had planted resilience, determination, and freedom. I often sat on the bench beneath the maple tree where Ethan had once wanted to hang wind chimes. I didn't sit to mourn. I sat to remember who I had become. The most profound realization came quietly. The sweetest revenge was not legal victories or courtroom triumphs. It was the daily lived experience of peace of sovereignty over one's own space. It was the click of the door, locking behind me, the aroma of tea in the kitchen, the quiet knowledge that no one could undo the life I had fought to reclaim. I had survived grief, intrusion, lies, and family betrayal. I had rebuilt a life, restored a home, and honored the love I shared with Ethan in the way he would have wanted. Each day I brewed tea, tended the garden, and walked through my home. I reminded myself I was not just surviving, I was thriving. And so when I look back at everything Diana tried to take, I understand the truth: she did not take me down. I was never hers to touch. I won not by taking from her, but by refusing to let her take from me. My house, my garden, my life, my voice finally, fully, unshakably mine. Before I end this story, I want to leave you with this lesson. Victory is sometimes quiet, sometimes unseen, and often measured in the small acts of reclaiming your space, your dignity, and your peace. The sweetest revenge is not in destruction, it is in creating a life where no one else can hold power over you. And that is how I finally became free. In the weeks that followed, the house settled into a rhythm that felt like home again. The walls no longer echoed with fear or tension, and the garden thrived in ways I had only imagined when planting those first marigolds. Each morning I brewed my tea wrapped in Ethan's old flannel shirt and walked barefoot through the soil he had once dreamed about. The smell of earth and growing flowers filled my senses, and for the first time since his death, I felt fully present. I spent evenings tending the garden, rearranging photographs and journaling memories of Ethan, our laughter, our quiet moments, and our dreams. The house had become a sanctuary where grief was allowed, but it no longer controlled me. I was free to honor the love we shared, without being shadowed by the manipulations and bitterness of those who tried to erase me. Sometimes I still think of Diana, her absence a reminder of the battles fought and won. She no longer lingers at the edge of my vision. She exists only in the past tense. I have learned that peace is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the presence of boundaries of control over one's own life, and of courage to protect it. I reopened my interior design business, fully helping clients create spaces that reflected their own strength and resilience. Every wall I painted, every room I arranged was a testament to the power of reclaiming life after hardship. Each client's transformation mirrored my own proof that beauty and growth are possible even in the aftermath of loss. The garden became more than flowers, it became a symbol. Marigolds, rosemary, lavender, and mint pushed through the soil stubbornly, defiantly as I did. I often sit on the bench beneath the maple tree, letting the wind shift the leaves and the chimes hang from above, remembering that growth is quiet, patient, and relentless. Life continues, and so does healing. I do not walk with fear anymore. I do not apologize for taking up space. I do not flinch when I pass the roads where her car once sat silent and waiting. I have learned that victory is not in retaliation, but in living fully, in claiming your space, in honoring your peace, and in cultivating life where there was once only conflict. This house is mine. This garden is mine. This life, this voice, this calm, steady, stubborn sense of self, it is mine. And I will never hand it over again. I am free.